Victor MacAulay was one of the more accomplished athletes of the interwar period. What a lot of people don't know is how significant middle distance and long distance running was in the sporting history of Nova Scotia, and Victor was at the center of that. Running of that genre was attractive because it wasn't particularly expensive, and yet people could become accomplished sporting figures and have reputations throughout the region, as Victor MacAulay did. Victor was one of a quartet of runners on the Nova Scotian team that went to the Boston Marathon, and he was an Olympian as well. And in 1924, that group included two Cape Bretoners, Johnny Miles and Billy Taylor, and two from Hants County, Silas McClellan and Victor. And Victor was as accomplished as the others. He had a top 5 finish in the Boston Marathon at one point, and another top 10 finish at the Boston Marathon. Went to the Olympics in 1924. So the connection to the marathon, but also the regional connection between the Maritimes and Boston, was a very important transnational community of sporting activity. Remember that in the 1920s, you also had the Fisherman's Cup races and the Blue Nose. So racing on land-based race courses and on the sea was a very important component of Nova Scotia sporting life in the interwar period. There's also a very funny and interesting story about how Victor first became recognized for his running ability. Now, I can't particularly vouch for this, but the way the story goes, and it's documented in the Nova Scotia Sports Hall of Fame, that his talents were first recognized when he was seen running down a steer on the family farm. So he was good in racing against man and beast. The Great Depression began in Nova Scotia not with the Great Crash of 1929, but developed immediately after the war. And in that context of post-war dislocation, many Maritimers were arguing that Nova Scotia hadn't received its rightful due within Confederation. And that manifested itself not only politically, but in Victor's case, he saw firsthand what it meant to be a Maritimer trying to make his place on the Canadian Olympic team. Victor began to call for maritime rights for athletes. He found when he went to the Olympic trials that the coaches there were far more supportive of athletes from central Canada, from Ontario in particular. And he felt that he wasn't treated with the respect that he should have been. And at one point in the 24 Olympics, he was compelled to run in a pair of shoes that were 2 sizes too large for him. Now you can imagine competing at the international level without appropriate equipment, and he was placed in that position, and that became an issue that was then followed up on by representatives in the Maritime Provinces Amateur Athletic Association, arguing and developing a campaign of maritime rights for athletes. And Victor really was the originator of that movement. Sport is a technology that we apply to making better communities, developing social responsibility amongst our youth, creating better bonds between parents and their children. And part of that whole process of building a more responsible society is a recognition of those athletes who made great sacrifices to bring credit to their communities, as Victor MacAulay has done. It seems to me that Victor's career in the 1920s is just as inspirational as those of the athletes of our own time. And I would emphasize the importance of going back into our past and seeing who people are that have had lives of accomplishment and recognizing those accomplishments for the community as a whole. Back in the 1920s, the Olympic team was small. Just to get there was as an accomplishment. So I'm so happy that we've been able to recognize the accomplishments of Victor MacAulay. He is more than deserving.
2017 East Hants Sport Hall of Fame inductee, Victor MacAulay.